She'd shared this room with 47 other girls, and the beds were all there, laying one by one, and all around there was torn wallpaper. It was dusty, it was dark, but this girl was lonely ever since her sister had died, and now, coming back from the funeral, she felt unwanted, like weeds in a garden. Her straight black hair fell down upon the bed, and her eyes, once so blue and shining, were half closed. There was a snarl upon her chapped lips. She'd been forced to cook, even though she'd just come back from her sister's funeral. This place was like a pigsty, with ragged bed sheets. She and her sister had sat, and they'd said many times that this place could be broken. It was so fragile, one touch and it would break. But she remembers a time before this time, when she'd had a pet. Pets could be her friends. Pets would not need to talk to her or tell her what to do. But being forced to cook every day and never being allowed to eat had made sure that she was thin and weary and worn. The dress upon her back that she'd gone to stand by her sister's graveyard was an ordinary, ripped pale and pink dress. It was like a dirty towel. She had nothing that would give her any optimism in her life, and she would look just like a rag doll. She was white as a ghost, heartbroken. She would think to herself, she would dream of burning this whole place down. But the only thing that could ever make her remember her sister were the blue boots, too big for her upon her feet. She tightened them with her wrinkled wash-day hands. She'd had to wash all of the clothes. She felt no better now, back inside of this orphanage. The sun was starting to set, and it cast a shadow over her face. The patterned square windows made a shadow trickle across her face, and all she could smell was the rusty plain beds. And she touched the brass rail and thought of her sister. The boots started to move. She couldn't believe it. She tightened them. They didn't seem to want to keep still. They'd started to lead her. They dragged her out of the bed. All of the other girls thought that she was just dancing or moving, but she started to collect dust upon her clothes. She had to go and cook, but still the boots made her go towards the door, and she rested her hands. The boots made her shake and shiver and lifted her in the air, and she found the golden key that led towards the graveyard that she'd been in that very afternoon. With a cloak upon her back, so tight and so black, she went to the graveside. She moved the dust and the dirt to one side, and as she lifted up the lid, she saw her sister there. She could not believe it. Rotted now only to bones. She remembered her beauty, her brown eyes and her curled brown hair, but it was as if her body had gone. She took a bone from her sister's hand, something to remind her, and she could hear them calling for her to go and cook. She didn't want it. She didn't like the feel of this bone, and it slipped from her hands and fell into the food, and everyone who tasted it, all of the owners of the orphanage, said that this was the best that they had ever tasted. And she smiled. There's a secret ingredient inside of it. And every day she'd go. The boots would lead her, but still tight upon her feet. And she'd fetch another bone and another, and soon her fame spread. People would want to know what the secret ingredient was, but always her lips were closed. She became rich. She moved out of that place. But day by day, she could see that her beautiful blue eyes, were starting to turn brown. She could see that her straight black hair was starting to turn blonde and curly. She had enough money to find herself a fine house, but she never grew. She never grew into a woman, for when her feet fitted the boots, she was now with blonde hair. She was now with brown eyes. She would have to hide the colour of her hair. She had money, more money than she'd ever known. And now she would live inside of a house, a brand new clean house. She would pray for her sister and look at the fountains in the yard. She had once felt regret for her sister, but not now, for she looked at the world differently. The king-sized table with only one chair, long glass windows, oak and gold all about her. Heartbroken, not for her sister. She would be vicious to all of the servants. And as she would go, a tear would fall on a cherry-scented candle as she looked into the mirror and saw she was changing to her sister. She was a cocky bully of a girl. People thought that she was like a diva with long silky hair that was knotted behind her, just like a regal lion's mane. She was a sneaky girl, but she'd got herself dressed in her finest clothes, crease-free denim designer dungarees, and standing by the side of the football pitch. Oh, she loved sports, especially football. And this girl had just eaten. She had the taste of spaghetti on her lips, teeth and tongue, and she looked all about her at the lush green grass behind her and all of the childhood boys that she knew so well. She'd known them all since they were 3 and 4, and all of the way through her life, people had thought that she was popular, but only popular when you were on her side. I'll tell you this. The sticky mud was starting to weigh that football down. It was stinking mud. It was cloying mud. Mud that was being kicked from one end of the football pitch to the other. It was dark, but her skin was light and pale. She'd made sure that her cheeks were red at this dark time of year, and her glaring, eager blue eyes twinkled like sapphires or owl's eyes as she watched everyone shouting and screaming to make sure that they could look at this football pitch. But the chanting that was supposed to help people, it was a mixture of screaming and yelling and shouting and booing and cheering. She was a tough girl, a sassy kind of a girl. She would always hide her hands. I'll tell you why. She covered them, oh yes, in black finger polish. But her fingers were encrusted with mud. She didn't want anyone to see them. She stood there thinking that all of the boys who played would like the way that she was. And there was a thin-lipped smile, a blood-red smile that glistened with a lip gloss that covered a sinister grin. She stood there, watching them all. She saw the football with its vivid colours, but now it was getting so heavy that it started to be stuck in the mud. There was one boy, a boy that she remembered, that when she was younger, she'd been a bully to him. She didn't care who she bullied. But this muddy ball was kicked above her. It soared above her straight black hair and fell in the lush green grass behind her, and everyone turned and looked at her. Everyone else wouldn't have hesitated for a second, but she stood there and watched everyone on the pitch, and the boy who had kicked the ball smile. Well then, aren't you going to get it? Or are you too good for this? People started to point. She didn't like this. People were looking at her, not for the reasons that she wanted. And so she went through the lush green grass, in amongst the trees. And it was as if the sound of the cheering had gone far away. And when she picked up that ball, she could feel the mud going underneath her fingernails, pushing itself. She held the ball. As soon as her two hands were wrapped about it, the mud fell from off the ball and fell to the ground, and she started to see it move. It started to make a picture that she recognised. There was a voice, a whispering voice, like a voice that she'd heard so recently. It was inside of her head, and there she could see a picture moving inside of the mud, of her with her sister when her sister was much younger, playing with a rope so that they could skip, and it showed her as she was raise that rope high in the air and raise it fast and long and catch her sister at her side. She felt a pain at her own side. There was nothing there, but her muddy hands had wiped all over her denim dungarees. She didn't like this at all. As she tried to stamp out the picture, leaves fell. Blood red and formed the shape of a heart that broke, that formed into a hat, and the voice, no longer a whisper, was a sound that you could hear, just like an ordinary voice with terrible words that fell. Oh yes, a hat that you took from a friend, without asking. You betrayed them. You took it. You broke their heart just because you said that it suited you better. She didn't like these words. She looked about her. Where could this voice be coming from? She had unpicked it and broken the hat, and now she could feel the buttons falling from off her clothes, and now she had to hold them against her, and again she moved her hands all over, and she was covered all over with mud. This voice rose from a whisper to an ordinary voice to a scream. She could see it now. All of the leaves and all of the branches were moving and making a picture in front of her. They formed a sheet of ice. And she could see herself. Oh, not so young now. But she could see as she pushed this boy. She could hear her own voice. It's all right. It's strong. It's thick. It's good ice. But it wasn't. And she knew it wasn't. It was thin ice. And she watched the boy floundering in amongst all of the leaves and the branches, screaming, yelling, and her again with the sinister grin that everyone knew her for. She watched. The ambulance came, took the boy away, and she was the first to stand there going, "Oh, I'm so sorry." But all the time she had laughed. And as she watched the boy being dragged from out of the ice, she could feel it scratch at her own skin. And the voice screamed in her ear, "It's about time that you paid for what you have done." A heart beat fast. The ball, without her asking, jumped into her hands. It started to drag her forward, cleaner than it had ever been, but all of the mud ran up her arms. There was a voice. "If you would wish to be found as a friend, then you had better do good things from now." Everyone laughed as they saw her, covered all in mud. They laughed at her. It didn't stop her. It didn't stop her at all. She continued on to do these things. And always there would be mud on her face that she could not rub off. Time passed. She learnt a lesson that if she did anything wrong, there would be a mark upon her skin. There would be a feeling of falling into water. There would be a feeling of heartbreak inside of her own heart. And it was only now, as she was a woman, as she stood relaxed by the side of the soft shell sand, she was exhausted, but careful to make sure that she would do good things from now on. And a calm, cold wind that made aching goosebumps upon her skin chilled her to her spine as she remembered the way that she was, a bully, a diva, a sassy kind of a girl. Oh, she was kind-hearted now. She was a kind girl. And she smiled as the flawlessly white seagulls screeched above her head. And for the first time in her life, from being a girl or a woman, she stood by the side of the sea and let the sea see her smile.